Hello, I'm Ana Cabrera reporting from New York with breaking news. As we come on the air, the markets are nosediving right now, just 30 minutes after opening and just hours after President Trump unveiled blanket tariffs on more than 180 countries and territories. You can see there, investors are rattled. The market diving some 1,300 points, down 3% right now. Consumers are bracing for higher prices. World leaders plotting their response. Here's what the president announced: a minimum import tax of 10% on dozens of countries. I mean, look at this list. It is significant. The U.S. also hitting some key trading partners with some much higher levels, some close to 50%. The list goes on and on and on and on. Now, this drastic move threatening to drive up prices for everything from shoes to furniture to produce. We are covering this from all angles this morning with NBC News senior White House correspondent Garrett Haake, NBC's business and data correspondent Brian Chung, and our international correspondent Molly Hunter joining us from London. Garrett, Vice President Vance was just out defending these tariffs this morning. What's he saying?
Anna, I think by moving the announcement of this tariffs yesterday till after the markets closed, we got our first indication that the White House was preparing for this to be a potentially ugly day of reactions. The vice president's message today was similar to that we've heard from the Treasury Secretary and other senior officials in this White House, which is essentially that their goals with these tariffs are so big, essentially the reordering of the American economy, that people might have to be patient and suffer through a bit of a day in the red like what we're seeing right now. Listen to the vice president just a short time ago.
This is a big change. I'm not going to shy away from it, but we needed a big change. We are fighting very hard to bring prices down. What I'd ask folks to appreciate here is that we are not going to fix things overnight.
Anna, that enters kind of the central question here, which is for the Trump administration's goal, which is to bring back all of this manufacturing that's left the United States over the last 40 years or so. How long do they think it will take to fix things, and exactly what are Americans expected to be in for here in the meantime? I think those are questions that the administration is going to continue to have to answer with this sort of economic mood music of the markets playing behind them.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about the international blowback in just a moment. But even what we're seeing here at home is quite striking, with Senate Republicans joining Democrats last night to vote against Trump's Canada tariffs specifically. This morning, Trump's former VP, Mike Pence, skewered the tariffs, calling this the largest peacetime tax hike in U.S. history. Garrett, this doesn't even appear popular politically with many in the president's own party.
No, and it's a reminder of how much control that Donald Trump does have over the modern Republican Party. When you see traditional small c conservative voices like Mike Pence, those 4 Senate Republicans who joined with Democrats, one of them including Mitch McConnell, the former majority leader in the Senate, condemning these tariffs as a tool that should not be used in this manner against our allies. I think you see just the barest amount of pushback there from fellow Republicans. But I do think the context here is important. That bill that was voted on yesterday will likely not even be brought up in the House, where more Trump-aligned Republicans control more of the levers of power. The president has essentially a stranglehold on his party's economic message at this point, although we did hear from a number of Republican senators yesterday essentially urging patience to a point with all this. We'll see how far that patience extends.
Garrett Haake, appreciate your reporting. Thank you so much. Brian, we've talked a lot about the auto industry in recent days. Beyond the auto industry, where will we see goods impacted most? What types of items, what stores, what can you tell us?
I mean, Anna, it's essentially everything that's brought into the United States. I mean, we were talking about auto tariffs because that was what was announced last week. That was kind of a sector-specific action from the White House. But what we're talking about here are all these name brands that are familiar to everyday Americans, and categories like laptops, smartphones, which come from China, which will now have an effective tariff rate, Anna, of 54%, because the 34% tariffs that were announced yesterday on China stack on top of the 20% tariffs that were already announced on China prior to the Rose Garden announcement yesterday. So we import so much from China when it comes to things like smartphones and tablets and other types of products, clothing as well. Now that can get 54% more expensive for importers in the United States to bring into this country. How much of that do they pass on to customers? That's going to be a big question. It might not be 54%, but it's also not going to be 0%. So just to put this into an average household number, because there's a lot of these numbers floating around, economists like EY chief economist Gregory Dacko estimates that the impact of these tariffs would reduce purchasing power such that the annual income loss that would be equivalent would be $690 for families, while in the bottom quintile, the loss would be steeper. It'd be about $1,000. So for those that are saying tariffs are basically equivalent to a tax, that's what that tax looks like, a reduction of $1,000 to the annual income.
And the people who are getting hurt the most are those who are already struggling the most, it sounds like.
Right. The prices are already high. It's worth noting.
Well, that's just it. And when we talk about a 10% blanket tariff, does that equate to everything getting at least 10% more expensive?
So not necessarily, because again, what we're talking about with the tariffs is that that's the increased rate that the importer in the United States is going to have to pay. So yes, it is indeed the case that if you bring, for example, a garment from Cambodia and you bring it into this country, that's not going to be 10%. It's going to be substantially larger than that, as the Trump administration was talking about. But that rate doesn't necessarily get passed on dollar for dollar to the consumer. But when you look at what producers have been saying, what companies, what retailers have been saying, they've been saying we're going to have to pass on most of it to consumers. So even if it's not necessarily 10%, it might be 5%, it might be 6%, it might even be more than 10%. It really is up to the company that's importing to decide what they pass on, but it's not going to be zero, and it's hard to imagine a world where prices go down as a result of these tariffs, at least in the short term.
And as we're seeing with the market reaction, I mean, almost all industries are going to be hit here. Nothing goes unscathed. Molly, what are global leaders saying? How are they reacting?
Europe woke up stunned this morning, Anna, that's for sure. Asia definitely woke up stunned. Of course, the announcement happened late last night, our time, around 9 p.m. local. I think a lot of people probably stayed up and watched that. But I'll run you through a couple of the reactions. Actually, the mildest words that we've probably heard are from the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who said we should react with cool and calm heads, not hinting at any retaliation immediately. The two most recent reactions, Anna, that we have gotten just in the last kind of hour or so, Russia, Dmitry Medvedev, the former president and the deputy chairman of the Security Council, has said that Trump has brought to heel the global trading system, introducing tariffs against almost the entire world. Of course, he explains that Russia barely trades with Europe or the U.S. because of sanctions. But he then says, and he quotes a Chinese philosopher, Anna, and he says, it is worth sitting on the shore and waiting for the corpse of the enemy to float past us. So there's some gloating from Russia.
Yeah, Russia not hit with these tariffs. They weren't even on the list, which was striking. And the White House saying it was because there isn't any trade happening with Russia right now. But Molly, the EU is a huge, huge trading partner. They just got hit with a 20% tariff. How are EU leaders huddling and plotting? What kind of options are on the table for their response?
Yeah, Anna, exactly. Taken as a whole block, 27 nations, of course, they are the U.S.'s biggest trading partner. With that comes a lot of leverage. Early this morning, the EU chief, Ursula von der Leyen, had a press conference. Excuse me. Take a quick listen to what she said this morning.
There seems to be no order in the disorder, no clear path through the complexity and chaos that is being created as all U.S. trading partners are hit.
Now, she says EU leaders are coming up with their response. She also said it's time to move from confrontation to negotiation, Anna. Now, look, the EU leaders could come up with retaliatory tariffs. They could impose trade barriers on U.S. service firms. No firm commitment on a plan yet, but we do know that trade ministers are meeting on Monday in Brussels, Anna.
All right, Molly Hunter, Brian Cheong, guys, stay close as we continue to follow this throughout the hour. Thank you.